Welcome to Byte-Sized Tech, where we like to blend casual conversations with some hopefully insightful discussions on the latest in technology and gadgets. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some recent developments in tech security that really caught my eye. It's kind of amazing just how creative these hackers are getting, but also a little unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah, what I find fascinating is how they're really starting to exploit the trust that we place in everyday platforms. Like, you wouldn't think that Google Ads would be like a hotbed for phishing, but here we are.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, right? Like Google of all places. I mean, we're so used to just seeing ads there that we almost become blind to the potential dangers. But hackers are totally taking advantage of that. Like, they're manipulating URLs to look totally legit, but then they redirect you to these phishing sites.
Yeah.
And some of them are even hosted on Google's own domain, like sites.google.com.
It's a pretty clever tactic when you think about it, because it plays on our ingrained habits. We're just conditioned to trust Google, so we click without even thinking. The homebrew attack is a prime example. Hackers created this fake site that looked exactly like the real deal. They even mimicked the whole download process, so people thought they were getting this trusted developer tool, but they ended up with malware.
And the crazy thing is they specifically targeted developers with this one.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a double whammy. Not only are they hiding on this trusted platform, but they're going after the people who are supposed to be the most tech savvy. I guess it just goes to show that anyone can fall victim to these scams if they're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. It's a good reminder that we all need to be super vigilant, no matter how experienced we think we are. And, it raises a really interesting question about Google's responsibility here. Like, are they doing enough to prevent this kind of misuse of their platform?
That's a great point. You'd think they would have some super sophisticated systems in place to catch this stuff. The folks over at Malwarebytes, those cybersecurity experts, they recommend taking a closer look at the ads before you click. And they actually say that you can analyze the ads to get advertiser info like their geolocation, which might help you spot potential threats. I actually tried it the other day, and it's surprisingly easy to do.
Oh, that's a great tip. I mean, it's all about being proactive and not just assuming that everything you see online is legitimate.
Speaking of proactive, let's shift gears to the U.S. government for a second, because they're cracking down on hackers in a big way.
Okay.
Apparently, even the U.S. Department of Treasury, like the guys in charge of the nation's finances, got hit with a major security breach. Not exactly the kind of news you want to hear, right?
It's a very sobering reminder that no one is immune to these attacks. And get this, the breach was linked to a backdoor in a third-party cybersecurity vendor. So they basically got attacked through a system that was supposed to be protecting them. Talk about irony, right?
Yeah, it's like something out of a movie. And the group responsible is this group called Salt Typhoon, a hacking group believed to be affiliated with China. This whole thing highlights the danger of what they call supply chain vulnerabilities, where a weakness in one of your vendors or partners can be exploited to attack you. It's like a domino effect. One weak link can bring down the whole chain.
Exactly. And the U.S. government isn't taking this lightly either. They've actually imposed sanctions on a Chinese individual named Yin Keqiang and a cybersecurity firm called Season Huayan Network Technology, both of which were linked to the attack.
Wow, so they're really serious about this. But it makes you wonder, if even the U.S. government can be targeted, what chance do the rest of us have?
It's definitely a growing concern, but I think the big takeaway here is that cybersecurity is a global issue, and it's something we all need to be aware of and take very seriously.
Right, and while we're on the topic of vulnerabilities, there's another big one making headlines that we need to discuss. It involves Fortinet products, which a lot of companies use for security. Have you heard about this one?
Yeah, it's called CVE 2024-55591. And basically, it's an authentication bypass flaw. It gives hackers what they call super admin access to certain Fortinet products. It's like giving someone the keys to the kingdom, basically. And it's got a CBSS score of 9.6, so it's pretty serious.
Yikes, a 9.6. That's almost a perfect 10 on the scary scale.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, this vulnerability affects FortiOS and FortiProxy, which are super widely used security products. So we're not just talking about a few isolated systems here. This could potentially impact a ton of organizations.
Oh, absolutely. And just to add fuel to the fire, there's this hacking group called Belson Group, and they decided to make a big splash by releasing something like over 15,000 stolen Fortinet configurations, IP addresses, and even VPN credentials. They basically dumped all the sensitive data online for anyone to grab.
Hold on, wait a second. So not only is there this major vulnerability out there, but now we have hackers leaking stolen data left and right? It's like they're trying to cause as much chaos as possible? What's their motivation here?
Well, in the case case of Bilson Group, it seems like they really just wanted to gain notoriety, like in the hacking community. They're basically showing off their skills and proving that they can breach even these supposedly secure systems. It's kind of a dangerous game they're playing. But it highlights a really crucial point. You see, this data was actually obtained using an exploit from back in 2022, which means that this vulnerability has been around for years.
Seriously, they've had this data for 2 years. That's mind-boggling. So many companies could have been compromised during that time. It's a huge wake-up call for anyone who thinks patching is optional, or that they can just afford to ignore security updates.
Exactly. And that's a big part of the problem. We focus so much on the latest, the flashiest threats, that we completely forget about these older
Yeah.
vulnerabilities that are still out there, just waiting to be exploited.
I guess it's kind of like forgetting to lock your back door. Because you're too busy worrying about someone breaking in through the front. You think you're safe, but you're leaving yourself wide open to attack.
That's a great analogy. And it really underscores the need for a much more comprehensive approach to cybersecurity. It's not just about reacting to the latest threats, it's about building these resilient systems that can withstand attacks from all angles.
So what can we do to make ourselves less vulnerable? It feels like we're constantly playing catch up with these hackers.
Well, for starters, I think we need to kind of shift our mindset. Cybersecurity can't just be an afterthought. It needs to be baked into everything we do online. That means being much more careful about what we click on, who we trust, and what information we share.
So it's not just about having the latest antivirus software. It's about actually being smart and aware of the risks.
Precisely. And it's also about companies taking responsibility for securing their own systems and data. They need to be implementing strong security measures, keeping their software up to date, and training their employees on best practices.
So it sounds like it really takes like a collective effort. We can't just rely on the experts to fix everything. We all have a role to play in making the digital world a safer place.
Absolutely, and that includes holding companies and organizations accountable. When they fail to protect our data, we need to be demanding better security and pushing for stronger regulations that protect both consumers and businesses.
Yeah, it is empowering to know that we can actually make a difference, but it's also kind of daunting to think about all the things that can go wrong. Sometimes I feel like just disconnecting from the internet altogether.
I get that. It can be overwhelming. But the reality is that the internet is here to stay, and it's only going to become more integrated into our lives. The key is to be informed, to be aware of the risks, and to take steps to mitigate them.
So it's about finding that balance between, enjoying the benefits of technology while also protecting ourselves from its potential dangers.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the theme of this whole deep dive, which is the evolving sophistication of attackers and the challenges of staying ahead in the cybersecurity arms race. All the techniques that we talked about today, exploiting trust in Google Ads, taking advantage of these supply chain vulnerabilities, using old exploits to steal data, they all point to this growing trend of hackers becoming more creative, more persistent, and unfortunately, much more dangerous.
It's almost like they're always one step ahead. So how can we keep up? What can we do to protect ourselves and our data in this constantly changing landscape?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I wish I had a simple answer, but the reality is cybersecurity is like this constantly evolving field. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, no magic bullet that's going to protect us from every single threat. But there are definitely things that we can do, both individually and collectively, to make ourselves less vulnerable.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. What are some practical steps that people can take to improve their online security? We've talked about being more aware and more careful, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it starts with the basics, really. Things we've all heard a million times but often neglect. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, keeping your software updated. Those are like the foundational elements of good cybersecurity hygiene. It's kind of like washing your hands. It might seem mundane, but it's absolutely crucial for preventing the spread of germs. Same with cybersecurity.
Right, the digital equivalent of washing your hands. I like that analogy. But what about those more sophisticated attacks? The ones that target specific vulnerabilities or exploit our trust in platforms like Google. How can we protect ourselves from those?
Yeah, that's where it gets a bit more challenging. But you know what they say, knowledge is power? The more you understand about how these attacks work, the better equipped you are to spot them and avoid falling victim. For example, we talked about the Google Ads phishing scam. Now that you know how hackers manipulate URLs to look legitimate, you'll be more likely to scrutinize those ads before clicking.
So it's about being a little more skeptical, a little less trusting of everything we see online, not letting our guard down just because a website looks familiar or an email seems official.
Exactly. And that skepticism should extend to the technology we use too. We need to be more critical of the apps that we download, the websites we visit, the devices that we connect to the internet. Think about the data you're sharing, the permissions you're granting, and the potential risks involved.
It's almost like we need to become like digital detectives, constantly analyzing and evaluating the information we're consuming and the technologies we're using.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's also about being part of a larger community that shares information and works together to improve security for everyone.
You mentioned earlier that the cybersecurity community was analyzing that stolen Fortinet data to identify vulnerabilities and help companies patch them. That's a great example of that kind of collective action.
Absolutely. And there are tons of other ways to get involved. You can report suspicious activity, share your knowledge with others, support organizations that are working to make the internet a safer place.
So it's about taking a proactive approach, not waiting for something bad to happen before we start taking security seriously.
Exactly. And the good news is that even small steps can make a huge difference. By being more aware, more careful, and more engaged, we can all contribute to a more secure digital future.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been a fascinating, albeit slightly unnerving journey into the world of cybersecurity.
It really has. But hopefully our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of the challenges that we all face and the steps we can take to protect ourselves.
Thanks for tuning in to Byte-Sized Tech. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more fun tech discussions.